Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, From Zero to 100 Million, Scaling a Firm with AI as Your Co-Pilot, brought to you by TSIA and sponsored by Projectworks. I would now like to introduce our speakers for today. Marc Troyan, Senior Director of Customer Growth and Renewal and Customer Success Research for TSIA, and Marc Orttung, CEO of Projectworks. As with all of our TSIA webinars, we do have a lot of exciting content to cover in the next 45 minutes. So let's jump right in and get started. Marc, over to you.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa. And welcome, everyone. Really excited for this session today. I'm Marc Troyan. As Vanessa said, I'm Senior Director of Customer Success and Customer Growth and Renewal Research here at TSIA. And I'm very excited to be joined today by Marc Orttung, the CEO at Projectworks. How are you doing today, Marc?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
We're so excited to have you. And because it's the first time we've had a session like this, I was thinking it'd be a great opportunity for you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and Projectworks.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with a little bit of my background. I've bounced between consulting and developing software throughout my career. So roughly half and half. I started at what became Accenture. I've done a number of tech startups that built software. And one of the most well-known 2 companies ago was Bill.com, where I was COO and president and led all the product development. There we did a B2B, basically financial platform, fintech platform for payables and receivables for small and mid-market companies. Then I left and I ran Nexient as CEO from 2014 to 2021. And at Nexient, we grew from about 34 million to 131 million. So we started at 39 million, though, I should say. So I learned a lot about what not to do. And then I learned a lot about how to grow your firm. And one of the challenges I had at Nexient was we did not have a platform to run the firm day to day, sort of an ERP, if you will. And so in the end, we tried a bunch in the market. In the end, we built our own. And I'd say that isn't a great approach. That's something that I learned along the way. And so after we sold Nexient to NTT Data in 2021, I met the founders at Projectworks and really liked them. And I really liked the platform they had created and felt like it would have solved our problem at Nexient. So I started by being on the board. I've been on the board for about 3 years. And about a year and a half ago, I joined Projectworks as CEO. So it's a platform that basically is your day-to-day resource planner, project management tool. It gives you all of the ability to predict how projects will turn out financially, to manage your resources. And it's the source of truth for time cards, expenses, leave, and invoicing. So it really helps teams focus on their clients, focus on their client work, and spend a lot less time on administration.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, that's, so relevant to the topic today, right? As we think about how services organizations are evolving these days, right? There's so much going on in the industry in terms of, what at TSIA we call services 2.0, right? So all this, technology and, new process and new talent that's needed and enablement for teams and things like that. It's so important to have that type of platform for your organization. And so we're really excited to talk about that today as we get into, sort of this PS or services 2.0 concept and how we can help, companies scale from, the ground up all the way through that $100 million barrier. So very exciting. So thanks again for joining me today. I think this is an exciting topic folks are going to love. So thanks again. Now let's jump in. So for those who are new to TSIA, we run a state of the industry in several different verticals every year. And so when we look at the state of professional services just across the industry, there are a few things that really stick out to me where we're struggling a little bit with this transition to the concept of like a services 2.0. So there's this sort of movement in the industry to move to subscription models, for example. But only 2% of companies have actually, made that jump to a full-time sort of subscription services offering. And only about 30% have any market success, therefore. So this is still a fairly nascent sort of concept, but it's definitely the way the tide is shifting. Companies will have to start to consider more, how can we develop more of these renewable service offerings as we move forward? And a lot of what's driving that, of course, is AI, right? So when we look across the industry today, AI is something that is, not a big secret. Everybody's investigating, investing in, and trying to determine what are the best elements, whether it's agentic AI or whether it's LLMs or, whatever version of AI, how can we apply this to our services functions? Well, only about 3% of companies say they have any sort of maturity around AI in their capabilities for their services teams. And only 26% are finding even a little bit of success. So again, this is still something that's very early stage, nascent to a certain extent in terms of true maturity, but people are definitely starting to experiment as we move forward. And then finally, the last thing, and it feels like this is something that we tackle every year, is we still only have about a 52% alignment in terms of strategy for services organizations with their. And so this disconnect, causes all sorts of challenges, of course, but especially at a time where, we're looking to evolve our functions, as an industry. It's really difficult if you don't have that alignment at the top. And, Marc, I think that's a lot of, kind of what made Projectworks seem interesting to you, right? As you not only were on the board, but took over as CEO, is helping companies get that sort of integration going. So, these are some topics that we're seeing at TSIA. And I know you've spoken with hundreds of consulting leaders this year alone. So what do you hear most often from those leaders that keeps them up at night?
Yeah, it's a challenging environment right now. Some of the things I've heard from friends that are in both large and small mid market firms kind of are crazy. So one example is a friend told me that they're being asked by their clients to cut their bids roughly in half.
Wow.
And the assumption is, you used to be able to do this project for X. Now with
Hmm.
AI, you should be able to do it for half of X. And then if you look at those statistics you have, you're down on the single digits that have, mature AI capabilities. Those don't sync up real well with client expectations, thinking you can do the work for half the cost. And what really shocked me was he said that they effectively are agreeing to it because their competitors are, and that's where the pricing is. So they're bidding at that level and then figuring it out, which is kind of amazing to me. I think a second thing I'm hearing from a lot of people is that they are working to master AI faster than the market and faster than their competitors and faster than their clients, because nobody's an expert. Nobody has been doing this for decades, right? There are a lot of people that have been working on the various parts of AI, but it has evolved and changed so much up until maybe 2023 before we even really had large language models that kind of broadly distributed, and nobody's got years and years of experience. So the name of the game, I think, is just to move quickly, learn quickly, and stay ahead. Um, so then I think the last one is just really struggling with where and how to apply AI in a way to really get the value out. Um, that's something at Projectworks that we spend a lot of time on. We actually apply a fairly traditional process to doing that. So we're doing a lot of customer research, user journey mapping, building personas, and figuring out the tasks they're doing, what is taking them time, and then where does AI fit in to really save them time. So one example we're working on today is we're building an AI proposals tool. And so AI is a big piece of it. It really eliminates a lot of the work in writing a proposal, but the tool itself has a whole lot of other technology and a whole lot of other process involved, because that's what's required to really deliver the value and the time savings. Yeah, so those three, bid at half the bid, learn faster than the market, and really figure out where to apply AI with value, I think is what I've been hearing.
Yeah, that's great. That's a lot of what we hear too. And I think your point is well taken about, with companies being asked to, look for opportunities to, be more efficient, let's say, utilizing AI. Companies are excited to invest in AI. They want to do that. But as an industry, while we're still figuring out the best way to apply the AI and where it can fit, it does create sort of an interesting challenge with, okay, we're going to drop our rates, but how do we actually, fill up the time, right? And that gets to the heart of this next point, which is, how do you scale your organization? So we've agreed that, AI maturity in terms of deployment is relatively low. But what's interesting is, when at TSIA, especially when we think about scaling, we're thinking about, how do we apply that technology in the most efficient way, like you just described. So I love that concept of, deploying AI and figuring in certain elements of the workflow to figure out where you can be most efficient. Because what we're seeing across the industry is some, again, kind of startling numbers, which is, across the industry, utilization rates are relatively low, 63%, which, typically I would expect to be much higher. Staff attrition is relatively high too at 8%. So we're still seeing a lot of turnover, right? So this is where we're really thinking about, well, where can AI play a part? And like I mentioned, with AI maturity being somewhat low, it's difficult to try to figure out, how do I scale my services organization when I'm still just trying to figure out how this AI stuff plays a part. So I'd love to know, I know you recently shared a LinkedIn post about how you've often been underestimated yourself in your role and how it's actually your kind of superpower. So what's something about scaling your leadership that most people overlook, but in your view, it's really just a hidden lever for firms, especially now in this age of AI?
Yeah, I think for me, what I was talking about in that post, I listen a lot more than I talk. So I think for me, that's a superpower. And I think you can translate that to your firm. So really listen to the market, listen to your clients, listen to where you are. And throughout my career, because I've been bouncing between consulting and technology, I've kind of adopted Jeffrey Moore has his technology adoption curve. Most people are probably familiar with from Crossing the Chasm, and he's kind of got the early adopters and the mainstream. I think that really applies to consulting firms that you have, especially if you're a small or mid-market firm, you have an offering that you're very good at. Where is it on that curve? Are you ahead of the curve? Are you at the part where the curve goes up quickly? Or are you somewhere in the mainstream or even the laggards? And so, really understanding what you offer, what you're good at, hopefully it's differentiated, and hopefully it's on that front part of the curve. Because as a smaller or maybe a boutique firm, you can't outcompete the big firms on the top and the mainstream, but you can on the early part of the curve. So I'd say one is listen to the market and really understand where you are. Are your customers early adopters, and are you doing something for them that a lot of other firms cannot do? Um, I think the other part of that is you have to build your client facing team to be really mature and really talented to be able to sort of sell and defend this idea or this offering you've got that's ahead of the curve, right? So if you are ahead of the curve, sort of by definition, your clients won't come to you and ask for what you have. They'll come to you and ask for something else. So I'll give you an example. When I was at Nexient, when I first started, we just did pure engineering outsourcing. So if you have an idea, we would build the software for you. We wanted to move to where we were helping you do the design and the research and sort of figure out what to build, why to build it, and then we would help you build it. So we moved to this idea that everything we did was a cross-functional team that had a product manager, it had a user experience lead, and engineers. And then, so in our case, and this was in 2015, 2016. We were kind of ahead. That's become pretty standard now, but then that was ahead of the curve. So our clients or prospective clients would not ask us for one of these teams. They would come and say, "Can I have 3 engineers?" That was sort of the general ask. And so I needed to have a go-to-market team or a client-facing team that was good enough to say, "Well, tell me about your problem. And actually, we think you'd be much better off if we helped you make sure the strategy was right, get the user design right, and then we'll help you build it." And so I think, you can kind of apply that analogy to whatever you're doing. If you're ahead of the curve, you need a go-to-market team that can translate whatever the market asks you for into what your more value-added solution is. And so that I found that took really talented people that were very experienced practitioners and happy to sell. So it was an interesting challenge to find people that had both of those skills in one person.
Yeah, those sound a little bit unicornish, but I know they're out there. So it's really great. And that, really leads into the next topic here is really thinking about, what you just said about you're not going to be able to go after those large legacy incumbents when you're first getting going. But there are some keys to getting off the ground, right? Is the, having a couple of good folks when you're just starting a firm like this, um, you know, is so critical. And when we look at some of the, challenges that we see at TSIA in the industry, when you're first starting out, it's difficult to get customers, right? You're just trying to figure out what is, the product market fit that you've got. You're trying to figure out your own go-to-market strategy. You're also trying to figure out, where are the pain points for companies that you can go assist them with. And that takes some, legwork and elbow grease, so to speak, to get there, right? So relatively
Yeah.
high customer acquisition costs. You're not going to make a ton of money at first. You're going to have to, while you're figuring this stuff out, you're just sort of getting things going. And of course, one of the things that, we see a lot is obviously the founders, right? The people like yourself, when you're building a company, you're doing a lot of that work initially. So, I know in the cheat sheet, you recommend that the founders involved in all parts of the business at the beginning, especially. But of course, and this is why we call it the $5 million bottleneck, people don't scale very well. At some point, you will run into some roadblocks. So, can you tell us a little bit about about this and how, founders, eventually start to get sort of overburdened and, maybe how AI can help us break through this sort of $5 million ceiling.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick context for the audience who may not know, we have built a cheat sheet that helps you go from 0 to 100 million. And we'll give you in the resources at the end, we'll give you a link to it. So you're welcome to go grab it and take a look at it. But we tried to boil down everything you need to do from 0 to 100 million. And as we really thought it through, there's sort of two walls you hit. And one's around 5 million. It's not exactly, but it's around 5 million. And one's around 25 or 30 million. And so you're exactly right. I'm giving almost contradictory advice. So in the very beginning, when you are just getting going, the founder or founders are the reason for the firm. They have deep expertise in something that nobody else has. And your best bet is for the founder or founders to be involved in everything. So they're the ones who are going to bring in new clients. They're going to be the ones who help shape the projects, get them sold. They should remain involved to make sure that the delivery is high quality, and they should be the one doing the check-in with clients. So that is a lot to do, but if you only have one or two clients, it's quite doable. Somewhere, and maybe AI is going to change these numbers, right? So as I was doing this with Nexian, it was maybe 5 million. So maybe the hope is that this wall moves later to 10 million, but at some point, the founder or founders cannot do everything, and they become the bottleneck, and so the firm gets stuck, and it's at around that 5 or 10 million mark. So then, what we're recommending is at that point, you should hire a team to give you leverage, but they're really hands-on leaders, so they're deeply experienced, but their skill set is still in being pretty much hands-on keyboard, working with clients, doing a lot of the work. And not somebody necessarily who's just going to manage a large team. So they're sort of like extensions of the founder. And I found that unlocks to about 25 or 30 million. So it really helps your firm grow. And then you had another wall there, which we can come back to. I'd encourage people to, we'll give you the link toward the end to grab a copy of that cheat sheet and take a look.
Oh, it's great. Fascinating. Yeah. And it's, such a challenge when you've got the mind share, right? You are the expert. So figuring out, and you referred to this before too, about getting those great people, right? It's a combination getting good people, and then hopefully looking at the technology to start to free you up to scale to this next level, which we're calling the middle here. Traditionally scaling to about 25 million usually means you need to have anywhere from 50 to 250 employees. But now with AI, you might only need half of that, right? You might only need 20 or to 100 employees. So how do leaders shift the way they approach people and culture in the age of AI to make sure that they are able to effectively deliver essentially without cutting back on the value that they've delivered? There are other things that founders or leaders need to think about as they cross that $5 million threshold and start to get to the multiples that they wanted to get to, and sort of get toward this $25 million mark.
Yeah, it's a lesson I had to learn as I was first CEO at Nexient, which is when I came in, I really wanted to focus on execution and really great execution and just getting people into each role that could do that role really well. And the longer I was sitting in the CEO chair, the more I realized it was about building a team that could grow and was really resilient, because the only thing that we had that was the same was that, like, everything else kept changing in our environment with our clients, what was going on the market. And so we really got into this growth mindset idea. There's a great book called Mindset that we had everybody read, and it really helped us as a team develop resiliency to deal with challenges that came up. And it helped us. There's sort of one of the principles of the book is that anybody can learn anything if you're willing to put in the time and willing to put in the energy. It's not that you can't. It's just that some things are easier, some things are harder. But with work, you can do all of them. And so then when you come back to the current era in AI, it's even more important than it was 5 or 10 years ago to have this mindset, because literally every day or every week, there's some new tool that's come out. There's some new approach that's come out. So you have to just be constantly in learning mode, constantly in experimentation mode. And I'd say you really ought to also have, back to those user journeys like we're doing as we develop our proposals product, kind of a knowledge of how your process works, where the most energy happens. And then as all these new tools come out, maybe this one could go to the piece of your process that takes the most time today. So you kind of start to evaluate what to test and what to learn based on how much it could save you in terms of time and energy, because you cannot keep up with it. It's overwhelming. So having the ability to learn and be resilient, and then having sort of a map of what you're trying to really automate and what you're trying to make better, allows you to absorb all of this change and figure out where to spend your energy and what to learn, what to have your team learn. That's where I think people need to really focus.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you touched on this before too, and I think the last bullet point on this slide kind of refers to this. So while you're figuring out that proper mix, I think there's that element of skill development, right? You go from product design and building something that there is a market for, and people are saying, hey, we need this, and you've built this cool thing. But at some point, you have to, especially as the founder or early stage folks on the team, you might want those folks to start to transition to actually selling those solutions, right? Not just kind of get out of the day to day a little bit more. Are there any tips you can give there around that skill development and helping people really consider, okay, we've done a great job of building something cool. Now, how do we go out and take this thing to market?
Yeah, it is one of the bigger challenges where ideally you have everybody in your consulting firm selling like that, and the people who are actually going to have the best results are the ones who are deeply experienced practitioners. Because, whatever you're doing, whether it be software or architecture, engineering, whatever you're consulting about, your buyers want to talk about that thing. They want to help solving their problem. And so the more you have sort of that content and that background, the more they're comfortable sharing all kinds of things with you. And so we had this challenge. A lot of practitioners are not at all comfortable selling. They're not at all comfortable having a quota that they carry. So we would have them start as they would begin to be in more and more senior roles on the project, I'd have them start by just observing the client environment and looking to identify areas where the client could use more help. That was sort of, and so we'd have them, effectively in sort of a sales lingo, that would be a lead or an opportunity,
Mhm.
but we wouldn't necessarily have them go attempt to close a deal around it. We would just say, identify these and give
Mhm.
them to your client partner who is much more comfortable selling. And it's like gold for them because they may not know what all the opportunities are. So it's a way to sort of begin to ease people into it in a way that they can be comfortable and they can still be themselves. And then over time, as they see the client partner come in and talk to the client about that opportunity, about that challenge, it often turns into something that's a really good project that really helps the client out. And so you sort of get more and more comfortable with, I could have suggested that. And when you really take it to its extreme, we would have practitioners who were the lead for a client, and the client would trust them so much in terms of solving their problems that they would come to them with next year's budget and
Mm.
say, here's what we're thinking. Here's all the projects. Here's all the money. As a salesperson, this is like gold, right? They're like sort of saying, here's where all
Yeah.
the budget is. Here's where all the challenges are. Could you help on any of these? Would you move any money around? But they're doing that because you've delivered so much value in helping them solve the problem that they trust you and they know that you're going to do right by them. And so it is selling, but it's not sort of the cliche, just trying to get somebody to buy something.
Yeah.
It's really from a point of trying to help them. So we would bring our consultants through that whole skill development curve from completely uncomfortable to maybe comfortable just identifying opportunities and handing them off. And then over time, maybe helping create a proposal. And then they would get just more and more comfortable with it.
It's great. Yeah. And that's something we see every day at TSIA is, um, you know, selling based on value continues to be the gift that keeps on giving, right? So if you can deliver that value and identify just through the work like you described of, working with your customers and them getting confidence and, getting more familiar and really feeling comfortable with you, yeah, they'll share all kinds of information. And you're right. Sales executives love it because warm leads convert at a much higher rate, of
Yeah.
course. And what we recommend actually is the best practice for any firm, but this is the size to start considering it is, yeah, really think about lead generation. It's a very simple thing to do. It can be very informal, but, it's a great opportunity to sell for you as the firm much more high, it would be much easier, I should say, to close those sorts of opportunities. And for your customers, they're going to see tremendous value because they're already seeing it. They know the team and all that great stuff. So great, great advice. And I think that is a great way to get past this sort of, or that what I like to call it sort of like the teen years, right? Of a firm where because you're growing and, you're building new muscles and as you're growing. And I think that's really great advice. So once we sort of started building some of these muscles, what we see is, we start to take this thing that scales now, right? We've got good people, trained everyone up, we've enabled them, they've sort of built these new muscles that they haven't had in the past. We're starting to see lots of customer success that's repeatable. You start to get case studies and all this great stuff going. And ideally, when we start to get up toward $100 million or thereabouts in revenue, we start to see much more, we start to see more consistency, I guess, as you're scaling, right? Ideally, we'd love to see utilization rates above 75% or gross margin, higher and those sorts of things. Things that you don't see when you're an early stage startup and, two or three people are just rolling up their sleeves and getting the work done. So, um, you know, but a lot of people see $100 million as sort of make or break, right? So
Yeah.
if we're thinking about this in terms of, trying to scale up and use AI as our co-pilot, so to speak, in this process, how would your strategy or business model differ? Um, how do you decide, whether you should continue to try to grow and scale in the way that you're doing? Are there other opportunities there that may present themselves? What do you see as you're working with companies that get to roughly this $100 million mark?
Yeah, I think first, there's so many layers to it as you get there. The first thing I would look at is the market. And so, what is your unique offering or unique set of offerings? And how is AI impacting that? So, will that market, if you're getting close to 100 million, is that market well into the billions so that you still have a lot of room to run? Or is that market maybe only a few 100 million and you're already becoming like the main player and there isn't a lot of room to grow? Um, and what's threatening that market and the offering that you have? Like, can AI or is there some tool coming that could really change your game? And then now you've got to reinvent everything and put your whole service line at risk. So that I would start with the market and how much room you have to run and whether there are really any threats that are going to potentially put your franchise at risk. Hopefully by the time you get to 100 million, you've built a pretty resilient firm. You can keep innovating and your offering continues to get better and better. Um, but it's always challenging. And then there's a lot of other pieces to it. I think there's another wall somewhere around 150 or 200 million. So the way I got Nexient through the um, the 25, $30 million wall is effectively, I didn't realize this till much later. I wish somebody had told me before I started, but I took over for the founder. He had two companies and the other one needed him to go run it. It was a venture firm. So he pulled me in to run Nexient. And I realized later that everything went through him. And that wasn't my style. So I sort of moved to a more decentralized leadership team. And I brought in a lot of senior people who effectively, though, you could boil it all down to our founder was sort of the bottleneck with his leadership team at about 35, 40 million. And I brought in 5 regional general managers who each could be their own bottleneck later for maybe 25 to 50 million. So now the firm can go, instead of getting stuck at 35 or 40, it can go to 125 or 250, somewhere in that range, depending on them. And so after we sold, we went to about 131 million. And I could definitely feel the machine beginning to creak and we were going to hit another wall. And so we needed to either, maybe you could add a few more general managers and kind of divide up the world a little bit more and you could get a little bit further. But I felt like there might be some other structure that we needed to get to. So really thinking about how your firm is structured and does that structure scale on up. The other thing that I found fascinating is a lot of people started to tell me that I had entered no man's land, that the number of firms that are between 100 million and 1 billion is typically fewer than 10 in any given segment. It's single digits. And that was sort of daunting because when I joined Nexient, I went and looked, and Gartner said basically there were 10,000 firms globally that did software outsourcing. That's what we were doing. And when we hit 1,000 employees, they said we'd made it to the top 175. And there are really only a few between 100 million and a billion because most of them they get acquired. And a very, very small number really stick it out and get to a billion and then keep going. So I'd say, and then there's the other thing you have to think about is yourself and your leadership team. How much energy do you have? You like for me, it had been a pretty rough slog to get there through 7 years to get over 100. I was a little bit burned out. So you have to sort of check your own energy level. Do you want, so I'd say you got to look at the market. You got to look at your team structure. Is AI threatening your offering in some way? And then your own team and kind of your energy levels and what you want to do. And so it seems, at least from the statistics, that almost everybody decides it's a good time to be acquired. But a small handful of folks really keep going. And you've probably heard of every one of the ones that have, right? That made it to a billion and beyond. There just aren't that many of them. So it's a great problem to have, but it is, you really got to think it through. And if you're going to keep going, you got to make sure you've reinvented your model to make it to 500 million or a billion.
Yeah, that's great advice. You don't want to become a victim of your own success, right? You want to make sure you're constantly innovating if you're going to keep going. But you're right. Once you get to about the $100 million mark, it seems like that's the point at which these larger firms will start to take notice because you start to actually become a competitor potentially,
Yeah.
or, add something to their portfolio that's a gap, which is another good position to be in. So, yeah, I think it's a great point to kind of take what you just said, that sort of self reflection, and decide, do we have the energy to keep going? Are we on the fast track to somewhere that's new and unique, or is it a great opportunity to partner with someone that can really help you scale at a tremendous rate? So yeah, I think that's really great advice. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much. I mean, you shared so many great insights with us today, and I want to make sure everybody has an opportunity to, connect with you if they would like to do so. So, one of the things we put together is, as Marc mentioned, the cheat sheet. You will see that in your resource list. But also, there's an opportunity here for folks to reach out and actually connect with you directly. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot about both through my time at beginning at Accenture and then through Nexian. I've learned a lot about how to grow a firm. And part of why I came to Projectworks is that I really enjoy working with others who are trying to go through that same challenge. So I spent a lot of my time talking to leaders and firms, and I wanted to make an offer to TSIA members to book an appointment with me. I'd love to do a one-on-one session with you and just focus in on your challenges as you're scaling, and they're all different. There's always lots of different interesting things, and I learn a lot from doing it, but I'd be happy to just share some of my experience. So I think both in the resource box, there's a link, or you can use this QR code and it will get to a bookable calendar, and you can grab a slot with me. And I'd love to chat with you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Marc. Okay, Vanessa, maybe back to you. See if we have a few questions.
We do have a few questions, so I'm going to hop right in. But just as a reminder to everyone, even if we aren't able to answer your question here live, go ahead and pop that question in the Ask a Question box, and we will make sure to follow up later. So we have our first question here from Bianca, and they say, everyone's talking about AI, but it still feels hard to pinpoint where it truly moves the needle in a consulting firm. Are you seeing firms get more value from using AI in delivery or running the business internally?
Hmm. I'm biased in this one because at Projectworks, we really help you run the business. And so I think there's huge value to be had there. And I mentioned earlier, we're working on a proposals tool that's in its alpha state today. It'll be in beta by next month, actually. So we're excited. We're getting customers sending proposals, and I think that is a really crisp way to take advantage of AI and take something that is time consuming but valuable, writing proposals, and hopefully be able to really get your team to collaborate better and have drafts faster and have a higher quality end result. So I'm going to say that running the firm is clearly a place of value. And then I think for each consulting firm, because what they offer and what they're expert in is so different, it's a really wide range of some have mastered, but based on those numbers Marc shared at the beginning, it sounds like most have not really figured out how to master that yet.
Okay, we have Ricardo saying, as an advisor, I've seen founders who try to automate too early and lose touch with clients. How do you strike the balance between efficiency and staying close to the work?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, starting at Accenture, I had it like pounded into my head that you need to be billable. And if, basically billable work is just where you need to be. And if you're not billable, you're kind of a loser. Like, so especially early in a firm, you want to be billable as much time as you can. That's kind of, I think that's correct. I think it's the right way to think about it. And so what I see is a lot of firms, smaller and mid-market firms, just don't ever make any time to run their own firm. So to the extent you can find tools, find platforms that do help you automate those pieces away, get them done in as few hours a week or a month as possible, and maybe even just take over some of those roles for you completely. So you can go be billable, you can go spend time either getting new work or working with the clients that you have. That's really what you should be doing. I find that, somewhere around 10 employees or 15 employees is when automation really begins to be valuable for a firm. If you're running a group of 4 people, you can probably get by with QuickBooks and a spreadsheet. Somewhere around 10, 15 is a really good point in the growth of the firm to begin to bring in sort of much more sophisticated project financial tools, more sophisticated resource management. So you can really understand your gross margin, understand your client margin. You can look at your utilization, and all these things just kind of happen for you automatically.
Okay, we have our next question from Samir, and they say we're around 30 million and debating whether to keep scaling or if we should start looking for an exit. What's the real indicator that a firm is ready to make the leap toward the 100 million mark?
Yeah, it's similar to that, to the set of things I said about when you hit 100, what you should think about. So first, I would definitely look at the market and, is your offering still innovative and valuable? Is it ahead of the curve? Is there an available market of buyers who you see in the next several years that are going to really take you from 30 up towards 100 million? We were lucky to drive about 40% growth per year for about 5 years. And that really helped us grow. So, do you have a growth engine? Do you have the right go to market team, or do you have the energy to go build the right go to market team? Because as I talked about earlier, you need really talented practitioners who are willing to sell to drive that level of growth. And then this might be something we could chat about, but we spent a lot of time on the compensation models for that client-facing team. They got paid more if they had high margin on their projects, and they got paid more if their clients were growing dramatically. And so we really tuned our compensation model to the results we wanted, and I think that was a big ingredient in what allowed us to grow that quickly. Yeah. So market and then go to market team would be the 2 things I would look at the most.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in one last question here. It is from Victoria, and they say, we've started using AI tools internally, but I'm worried about the silos it's creating. The tech savvy folks are running ahead, and the others are feeling left behind. How do you keep culture unified in an environment like this?
Yeah, it's a challenge I think a lot of people are seeing. One thing I've seen that works well is to get small cross-functional teams and give them challenges to go work on, either something to make the firm more efficient or maybe to help with your client delivery. And I would purposefully partner up both people from different functions and maybe some of the most tech savvy and the least tech savvy on the same team, and try to get them working together and try to get them as a group to learn from each other. And hopefully your tech savvy people will pull up the ones that are less tech savvy, and everybody will get comfortable experimenting and learning.
Okay, well, thank you both so much for today. And I know we still have questions. Like I said, we will follow up with you. We haven't forgotten about you. And since we have come to the conclusion of today's webinar, just a few quick reminders. There will be an exit survey, and we'd appreciate it if you could please take a few minutes to provide your feedback on the content and your experience by filling that survey out. And also, there will be a link sent to you for the recorded version of today's webinar shortly. I'd now like to just take this time to thank our presenters, both Marc Troyan and Marc Orttung, for delivering an outstanding session. And thank you to everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's webinar, From Zero to 100 Million, Scaling a Firm with AI as Your Co-Pilot, brought to you by TSIA and sponsored by Projectworks. We look forward to seeing you at our next TSIA webinar. Take care, everyone.